Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am tonight's entertainment in this very odd and strange time that we're living in, when new forms of entertainment seem to be coming about. I hope this is a medium that catches on. I don't have any idea whether it will or not, but it could be a pretty good thing if it ever does. I think it's pretty cool. So, full disclosure, one of the things that I like to do is I like to connect stories that I come up with and stories that I read with beverages that I like to drink. I have some ideas about what beverage goes with this story, but I'm not going to be the last authority on that. So, I'm trying to get into my LeVar Burton mindset because he's the master of this sort of thing. So go and get what you're going to drink, and bear in mind that this isn't, I understand completely that the visual part of this particular entertainment format isn't going to be the most exciting part, so feel free to treat this as a podcast or something of that kind. And I will begin. The Lightning Trapper. Gingham told folks that Maisie Clyde Smethwick caught the best lightning. He told folks that her unique song and dance brought down quicker, brighter, longer-lasting lightning than any other trapper in 8 counties. And that was the Gingham Guarantee. Gingham used to say that, which is why he had loyal customers buying Maisie's lightning. Gingham used to say that, and Gingham was wrong. Selling seemed to work that way. Maisie knew different. Maisie knew that any fair and all good lightning trappers knew. Lightning wanted to work. Lightning liked to work, else it wouldn't deign to get caught at all. Lightning enjoyed work, more than most people did. There was a trick to it, though. The old-timers would talk about repeat customers, and most of the kids didn't believe them. It took most lightning trappers a long time to figure out that lightning is people too. Lightning is lots of people. Each bolt is a different person, and more of a person than most people. Maisie's opinion. You always got your second best lightning from an old timer because they figured out the trick. The trick is making it attractive to come work. However you did it, lightning did better work for them who made it look like more fun. In a way, Gingham had it right, because you got your best lightning from Maisie. Where he was wrong was in saying it was her lightning that was better. Everyone had the same lightning. If you brought through her, you just got more willing lightning. She wasn't an old-timer, but she had a particular knack for it. She danced and sang on her hill. Trappers have their favorite spots, and they covet them. Maisie's was a hill not too tall. That was the key. It didn't rise high enough out of the surrounding trees to be visible as anything except a haze on rare, clear days. She coveted it, and that's the superstition. Your spot didn't matter much, even though trappers always kept theirs secret. Probably that's from liking to work alone more than anything. Maisie danced. She sang her song. The rain fell thick, ropey down her hair and face. It slapped on her leather fur hat. It had muffled ear flaps for the thunder. She buckled it under her chin. She wore goggles, too, darkened so she could watch the flashes. They looked like cracks in darkness when they fell out of the gray sky, like a crack that sucked all the light out of the world for a second. She leapt and shouted, splashing in the mud and laughing at the sky. Her thin limbs waved as if blown by the wind. She looked light enough to be swept off, yet rooted like a sapling. She was so used to the cold, wet, driving storm that she looked part of it. It had been a productive storm. Her little forest of bottles on sticks stuck up in the mud at the middle of the flat-topped hill. More than half of them glowed with the ghost light of caught lightning, maybe 8 bolts. She leapt and shouted and clapped her hands to greet each one. It paid to show them how happy she was. They always appreciated it, especially first-time customers. She thought she could get another. She felt one last great flash fizzling at the back of things, priming itself. She felt it in her bones, trickling. She felt it in her bones, trickling at the inside of her skin. The air had that full quality, motionless behind the tempest of a big lad coiling up before dropping out of the sky. Oh good, it looks like it's still working, but Facebook doesn't think it is. This is her song. Come down, my friends, fall from the sky. Join me, your friend, in my wild cry. It may be sad, this big human place. When you come down, we'll light up the whole space. Light it up. Yeah, yeah, yeah. She sang like that. She had a few more verses. The throaty song crowed at the sky, and the dance that splashed in the puddles and the mud warmed her from the inside. The rain coursing down the wrinkles in her jacket and clothes, and boots and cap didn't bother her. It might be a deluge, but she didn't care. The warmth inside her from her song and dance, and the fun of trapping rose to her skin. The little hairs on her arms prickled. Then she felt it, the telltale frisson that the lightning trappers got to know, the feeling like silence expanding out of every inch of air pressing on her skin. Silence turned into texture, energy too big for the air to hold it. She leapt, sang the last line of her song. She landed, mud splattered away from her boots. Then she raised her arms toward her bottles and she crowed. When she did, the world blackened. All the light got sucked out. For her it did, because she watched it, the thread-thin rip in space brighter than anything that, though narrow as a hair, filled all her sight behind her goggles. For an instant shorter than a heartbeat, although her heart for a moment stopped, she saw the lightning, fallen from the sky and blotting out the world, bright as white thought. The moment was everything. Then the moment was gone. The rain came back, or it had never stopped, and she noticed it again. The world came back. Then the second half, the thunder whooshed against her face. Thunder is a solid thing. It's the voice of lightning, but somehow not exactly the same as lightning. It carried the voice of lightning. She thought she recognized the voice in it. It reminded her of one of her ideas for an invention, a thunder trap. It had never been done before, but she thought she could rig something out of a sponge and a windsock. There was something in that. The following silence was vast, although it was filled with the shushing of rain. Maisie's heart rattled. She crowed again and leapt in the last few steps of her dance. Then she ran through the rain, sliding through the mud and grabbing her big bag on the way. She started to gather the lightning up. She recognized some of it. It all looked the same, an ultraviolet glow at the edge of seeing it in old heat-smoked bottles of thick glass, tempered in that particular way that they needed to be in order not to break from the lightning sitting in them. She unlatched them from the rods, gathered the rods, put them away in her bag, the tools of her trade, and they required care. Yes, she thought she recognized some of them. They couldn't be judged one from the next by looking, not to her eyes. She thought she'd recognized some of their voices when they'd fallen, saying hello. She couldn't tell them apart by looking, but the tickling in the air around the bottles had a personal feel. Always had for her. Yes, she definitely recognized some of them. She said hello to them. Hello, Chimes. Hello, Eastwick. Haven't seen you for weeks. They probably had their own names, but she didn't speak Thunder, so she gave them nicknames. Some of the lightning was new. She sang her songs again to them, but lower and more melodic, absently like an afterthought. She'd give them nicknames by and by, too. She rarely told people about the nicknames. She told Gingham once. "Why'd you name a ranch?" he'd said. After that she kept it to herself, and never told him about pincer, torque, or bull, her pliers, monkey wrench, and hammer. Gingham wouldn't understand. Maisie didn't understand Gingham either, though, so that was probably fair. She got to the last lightning trap. She'd saved it. It was the last one that came down. She thought she recognized its voice. "Hello," she said. Yes, this was one she knew. The bottle, like all the rest, looked nearly empty, and looked full to brimming with a huge eagerness. Even from a distance, odd bits of how my book is sticking together. Even from a distance, she recognized it. She picked it up and smiled. "Hello, Tinsel," she said. Tinsel tickled her hand. Tinsel wasn't the first bolt she'd ever caught, but it was one of the first that she'd ever named. Tinsel'd fallen down to work for her many times before. One of the first bolts she'd realized had a personality. Then she realized that all lightning bolts had personalities. When she'd learned that, she started singing to them and talking to them and encouraging them, but most of all thanking them and praising them. They had no reason to do work for humans. Lightning neither gained nor lost anything by it, and the only thing humans had to offer them was something interesting to do. The only thing more than that Maisie had to offer them was friendship. Tinsel. She took it as a good sign. Heavens knew she needed a good sign today. Today would decide it. She'd eaten her last scrap of cheese and bread today. Gingham had never encouraged her to plan ahead. He'd usually brought her food, and it hadn't occurred to her to ask where it came from. He'd asked her to reimburse him for it, and then she'd go back to her workbench. Now, her cupboards hadn't much left in them. All she had left was her lightning, and lots of that. It had been a good storm, plus she'd saved a little from last storm. It used to mean a trip to Gingham. Today it didn't mean a trip to Gingham. She put Tinsel's bottle in the bag with the rest of the lightning. At the bottom of the hill, just inside the line of trees, she reached her little cart. She'd built it herself. It had 4 big wheels, and it was slung low to the ground. Big enough for 2, but only if the second person didn't mind squeezing behind the driver. Folks said it looked fit to fall apart, tied and bolted together, so harum-scarum like that, with messy welds and all sorts. It served her perfect. She stowed her sack of trapper's gear in the compartment in the back. Before buttoning it up, she pulled one bottle of lightning out of the sack. "Hello, Mighty," she said. Mighty tickled her hand. Maisie smiled to it. There was a spot to load bottled lightning into the motor, a motor made half of scrounged parts. Maisie slid the bottle in, top first. She thumped it into place with a sharp tap. Dropping into the seat, she strapped herself in. Then she flipped the switch. Mighty started working, sending energy into the motor. Lightning energy was some of the best. The spinning parts of the motor started to spin. The thrumming bits started to thrum. The pulsing bits pulsed. Maisie pushed the go pedal gently, checking the sound, making sure that funny rattle near the back didn't sound too bad. Satisfied, she put it into gear. She popped the clutch. The wheels skidded, throwing up mud. Then they bit, and the car sped off into the woods. The sound it made was a rattle and a splatter from the mechanism, and the wheel and a whir from the motor. The secret was power and knowing how to use it. One bottle of lightning could have powered a truck more than 20 times as big and heavy as her cart. It shouldn't have worked to put so much energy into such a small cart. Maisie knew the way of it, though. She'd needed help with the welds and the lifting, and some of the more odd bits of how motors worked. The important parts had been her. She'd known how to change things so that the lightning could run through without getting lost or angry, because that's when it exploded. Tinsel had helped her with the design. Tinsel and a few others. Worked smooth now. She zoomed through the trees, zagging around trunks and splattering through muddy puddles. She reached a dirt mud road. This would lead her to Hexville, the near town. Her home and shop were there, and that's where she'd always sold her lightning before. Or rather, where Gingham had. Gingham and the Gingham Guarantee, guaranteeing the quality of lightning to customers who eagerly paid over their coin. Then he'd pay her, and she couldn't help noticing she got less than half of what people paid. She'd kept her silence. She preferred silence. It solves problems. That had always been part of the Gingham Guarantee. Well, Maisie Clyde Smethwick knew a problem. She didn't like it, but then nobody in Hexville did. That was a good reason to solve a problem, she figured. She knew two, really. She hoped one would solve the other one. She slid her cart sideways around a bend in the road. The mud flung up, the rain fell down. Thunder from behind. Past the spit of dripping rock, she saw the gray roofs of Hexville. In the gray stormlight, a warm glow came from the middle of town, where the lanterns glowed from under the big tents. Summer Bazaar wouldn't stop just because of a little torrent. This was storm country. Anyone unhappy with that didn't last long in Hexville. The last slope of the hill let her coast down Collin Lane. The first buildings at the edge of town zipped past. She braked for a blind corner. The only person she saw was the lamplighter. He couldn't light his lamps in the rain, but he checked them. Everyone else was at the bazaar. She trundled onto Main Street. It was one of the few paved streets in Hexville. For a few moments, she stopped in the middle of the street. Over towards town center on the green, the bazaar glowed. Its glow made the rising evening seem darker. Folks talked. Music played. All of it far away and muffled by the rain. The plan was to join them soon, even if Gingham was there. So was most of the town. Left, just about right opposite the tents of the bazaar, stood an old house. Loomed more like, and it creaked by the side of it. Old Soames' place, which had stood in Hexville since near as anything when the town got established, and for near as long stood empty. Empty houses gained in reputation, and usually gained in the boating sort. That's the kind of mood that soaks into the dust and starts getting mean. For going on longer than most of the people of Hexville could remember, Old Soames' place had been a problem on account of that. Ill feeling lived in dust. That's why it's so important to keep homes dusted. Dusting breaks up the malice. If left alone, sometimes the malice grows, and sometimes it grows so much it starts getting hungry for more. And sometimes its hunger invites in things that find that hospitable. Guardians of the malice and hunger. Not all haunted houses have been haunted by dust spriggans, guardians of the malice and the dust where it lives, but Maisie'd never heard of one that wasn't. Dust spriggans were absorbing things. They soaked up energy, which is the main thing that keeps them alive. That was the first important part of Maisie's plan. The other part was that lightning is a giving thing. Not much has more energy than lightning. The way Maisie understood it, a dust spriggan could try and suck everything out of the lightning. Could try as much as it liked. Wouldn't hurt the lightning one piece. At least that's how Maisie understood it. She hoped she had it right. Nobody else had done it because nobody else knew how to build the mechanisms that Maisie knew how to build. Or that's what Maisie hoped. She drove her cart up the dark main street. Any light and noise from the bazaar faded behind her, leaving the gray light under the storm. It started raining a little less. With less hurrah than it had any right to, Old Soames' place arrived. Another house in the darkness, its paint cracked and its windows boarded. Maisie stopped her cart in front of it. For a while she stared at the house and wondered how it could justify looking so calm. The shadows seemed deeper around it. It looked back at her. Its four boarded windows felt like closed eyes in a face of flaky skin. and it knew she was there. She swallowed. Her palms sweated. The weight in her gut tugged the corners of her mouth down. Clearing her throat, she got out of her cart. She pulled 2 leather belts out of the compartment in the back. She'd made them special, and she started to load bottles of lightning into the brackets in the belt. Then she slung them, one each, over her shoulders. Long bandoliers made of old tool belts, and hanging at the bottom of each was a gadget she'd invented. They were 2 handles with triggers, like guns without the stock or barrel. She didn't feel ready. She was ready. She pulled her goggles over her eyes. It was all shadowy now, but she'd gotten used to judging things by vague outlines because of her goggles. Taking a few steps up the broken front walk of Old Soames Place, she grabbed at the gadgets off her lightning-strung bandoliers. The ear flaps of her cap flapped when she walked. Her boots sloshed in the mud. Pausing for a last deep breath, she looked up at the 2-story house. It stared back at her. It waited. She filled her lungs, then emptied them. With a quick motion of one arm and then the other, she loaded a long, thin bottle of lightning into each of her gadgets. She now held 2 pistols with barrels made of slim bottles filled with the afterimage of ultraviolet glow. Casting a last glance towards the warm light from the bazaar, she set her jaw, or at least she frowned heavier. She hoped this would be enough of a show, or it wouldn't count for much. She thumped up the 3 rickety steps to the porch. The door wasn't locked. The house was guarded by common sense. She went inside. The plan, such as it was, had a simpleness to it. Make a flash, attract some eyes, sell her own lightning. It's like Gingham's guarantee said. Lightning power solves problems. Solve a problem, but solve it flashy. That was the idea. The dust floated in the musty air. Gray light struggled through the gaps in the boarded windows. The shadows stood stronger, leaving the ground floor hard to see except as shapes in shade. A couple doors were just dim instead of dark. The faint glow from her lightning bottles made flickering blobs out of the few broken pieces of furniture in the front room. She hoped it was furniture. The lightning glow wavered, so what paleness it cast on things moved. She hoped it was a chair missing a leg and half its back, and she hoped it was a lamp, and she hoped it was a sofa. She hoped none of them moved, that just the purple-white glow shimmered and things looked like they moved. Everyone knew what happened. A dust spriggan wasn't so much as a collection of bad feelings. Everyone knew that kicking up dust meant the dust spriggan came out of the shadows, made all of dust and hollowness, and it turned into something unliked. It fed off fear. It liked fear. It wanted more of it. Maisie thought about her fears. Black beetles? Quicksand? Hunger? Hunger. She tried not to let her belly aching distract her, although she didn't know how the dust could turn into hunger. She raised both her lightning guns in front of her. Kicking up the dust, she walked into the room. The house ached and creaked. The floor popped under her boots. The dust came up in wisps from the floor. Maisie moved from one room into the next one. She dragged her feet. She leapt at small noises, swinging her guns on corners and new shapes. Every step she took, she expected something to leap from the shadows. A hand, a head, anything. Her hands sweated, her heart pattered, her nerves wavered. Because nothing happened. Nothing kept happening. She moved to the 3rd room, perhaps a kitchen. The shape in the middle might have been a butcher's block. The cabinet doors hung off broken hinges. The wavering lightning glow shook a little more because her hands shook. Something moved. Something near the wall. With a cry, she pulled the trigger on one of her guns. It let loose a great flash, bright as blindness. That was Thursday, some lightning she'd met before. The thunder came, big as the house. Her heart shook from it. The darkness and silence swooped back in. Then she saw it. A loose window shutter had blown in the wind. Nothing else, and nothing left of it except smoldering splinters of wood. Her heart pattered. She flicked the switch to drop the now empty bottle of lightning out of the gun, then snapped a new full bottle on. She couldn't keep her hands steady now. Not quite. The new silence pushed in on her. Except it had something in it. A sound, smaller than silence. Couldn't place it at first. She didn't have it. Not like gravel, not like sand rushing from an hourglass. Like those, but without any weight. Sound that barely itched the air. It came from behind her. Slowly she looked around. It came out of the dust. The dust swept itself up from the floor, brushing like a swift silence across a breeze. It climbed, stacked itself together into a swarming pile, a grayness more solid than the shadows, but only just. The mound grew taller. Then it was wide, then quite tall indeed. Then something like arms parted from its sides. Its trunk split into two legs. A head rose from its back. The air, without changing anything in its musty closeness, the air started to move. It was a light wind, but it sucked in towards the dust spriggan. It had no eyes. It had no face. It looked at her. Did it speak? She thought she heard her name, and she thought she knew the voice. A wiry one. She knew its bones, except unfamiliar and dried out, like it had been left in a cellar to decay. For a moment she looked at it. It lunged. She raised one of her guns and shot at it. The lightning flashed out. That was Eastwick. It filled every corner of the darkness for a heartbeat, one jagged filigree of silver cutting through the air. Then the lightning cleared and the darkness swooped in again. She had a heartbeat, feel relief. The dust spriggan wasn't there. She'd got it. Except two more figures swept in onto her. She squawked. The dust spriggans seemed to have breath, or at least the dust swept across her cheeks. She shot another bolt of lightning. That was Riser. It thundered into the chest of one of the dust spriggans. The light blew the figure apart, forcing it to join the shadows again. The other spriggan blew at her, a gush of dirty wind. She ducked under its slow arm, then she ran. She ran into the front room, kicking the door closed behind her. It took her longer to load new bottles of lightning. She kept fumbling. Finally, the bottles clicked into place, one after the other. Claude Chesapeake and a new customer who hadn't a name yet. They locked in place just in time. The dust spriggan wafted through the house. Its smoke cloud body loomed in the other door into the front room. It had brought a friend. Shouting, she shot both bolts of lightning at them. She wasn't sure if either bolt hit, because during the first burst of light, one of the dust spriggans rushed at her with a noise like collapsing. The smell of moldy dust wrapped around her. It lasted for a second, not much longer than the flash of lightning. A second was enough. She flew off her feet, crumpling against the wall. She shouted, fell to the ground. It hurt, but it hurt her bravery more. She could still smell the dust, coarse and lifeless. It clung to her. She kicked along the few feet of floor to a battered old sofa with no legs. She took cover there. Then the dust started to wail. She almost heard it. Mostly it blew in hard jets, striking the sofa, which shook and shuddered. Whorls of dust blew around and nestled on her hair and lips. She managed to load another bottle, though her hands shook. Tinsel, she could tell from the feel. She started to hear words in the dust, echoes at first, suggesting in the same dried-up, wiry voice. The dust spriggans kept slamming into the sofa, startling her. Then she caught it. Each spriggan said one syllable in their empty voices, so it came in bursts like punches, but she caught it. It's the gingham guarantee. Over and over again. With each word, the dust spriggans slammed against the sofa. This one hard, this one harder. The sofa juddered against her back. Dust puffed around her. They did it just to frighten her. She knew it. It didn't help to know it. Every time the sofa shook against her back, and the dust puffed and brushed against her face, she shied. The dust spriggan hit faster and faster. It's the gingham guarantee. Faster and faster, over and over, till the words ran together, and the sofa shook, and the floor shook. She couldn't get away through the splash of dust, growing thick as a cough. Curled up, she clutched her head. She coughed. The dust sucked the moisture from her. Her lips were dry. Her clothes were gray with it. She didn't know what else to do. It should have been working. Dust spriggans took. Lightning gave. Lightning gave more than anything else. It should be working. It wasn't working. The dust kept pounding. Her gun was against her one ear. She had her eyes shut tight. Tinsel glowed through her eyelids. She heard something. She wasn't sure how long she'd been hearing it. It was quieter than the dust's hollow shouting. It's the gingham guarantee. Quieter than it, but closer. It came from Tinsel. She pressed Tinsel's bottle to her ear. It was something crackling, snapping and zapping like lightning made small. It also had meaning. She recognized it. It had a tune. We'll light up this whole space. Light it up. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Tinsel sang on. That was Tinsel's voice behind the thunder. Maisie recognized it. Then in the brief, intuitive way, without words, but only with meaning, that the lightning sometimes talked to her, Tinsel reminded her of something. The lightning didn't need to stay in the bottles. It did because it wanted to. It was asked to be imprisoned, so it stayed. It didn't need to. It wanted to. Because Maisie promised to take care of it. It was about choosing what's important. They respected captivity because they respected Maisie. But lightning didn't need to be respectful. It just depended what it got asked to do. Then it smiled. Tinsel had a nice smile. It wasn't something to be seen, but it tickled and warmed Maisie's dusty cheek. She knew what to do. The sofa shuddered against her shoulders. The dust struck it. First, she pulled both the bandoliers off. She had 7 or 8 bottles left. She howled, then tossed it back as hard as she could over the sofa toward the middle of the room. The bandoliers fluffed through the dust spriggans. The dust spriggans didn't stop the bandoliers. They clattered on the floor. The bottles wouldn't break. They were too sturdy to break from that. Then she took a deep breath. Well, deep as she could, sitting in a musty cloud of dust. The sofa shuddered. She steeled herself, and she pressed her lips together. Maisie Clyde Smethwick rose to her feet. She spun in place, then braced herself. There were a half-dozen dust spriggans now, gray shadows in the black shadow, moving dust people talking at her like gingham. Their husks of voices textured the quiet. They all shuffled, bending to charge again. She pointed Tinsel toward the wavering ultraviolet glow that lay in the middle of the room. Maisie began to crow. She pulled the gun's trigger. Tinsel burst forth, a bright thread, a crack in the world, letting all the light in. Tinsel's thunder broke the air in the room, a bark of joyous laughter, big as the sky. The moment hung in the flash of light. The dust spriggans, for that sliver of an instant, didn't move. Tinsel made a jagged line between Maisie and the 7 bottles of lightning on the floor. They wouldn't break if thrown. Tinsel could break them. Tinsel broke them. All the lightning burst out at once, pointed nowhere except towards freedom. The world flew apart. That was Maisie's best guess, anyway. She couldn't see anything. Forget seeing except the white puffing shadows like a candle flame. Forget hearing. There was a wall of sound, if sound was solid, that whooshed into her. A million pinpricks tickled, warm, gentle, but hard and fast as whiplash. The lightning was being gentle with her. The floor fell away. She crashed through something backward. The next thing she felt, she splattered into the thick mud and slid for a while. Silence. First, a silence of the aftershock. The wall of thunder shoved everything aside. It left calm behind. She felt something falling on her. 1,000 somethings. It had started raining again. It felt good. The rain rinsed the dust off. She liked that. Next, she heard things. She paid no attention to them at first. Her breath had been knocked out of her. She wanted to catch it. Besides, she could see again, now that the world had been emptied of all that light. It seemed washed to her eyes. The grays were all just a little shinier. Nestled in the mud, comfy as anything now, she looked up at the sky, past the rain, up at the gray clouds. Lightning flashed up there in the storm. She watched a few bolts skipping from one cloud to another. She smiled and she waved at it. "Lands, you all right?" somebody said. An umbrella, then a face came into sight over her. A face with spectacles and a big mustache. Raylan Crum, the head of the county council. Not a bad man, just a loud one. Maisie tried to say she was. The dust had got in her throat, and she was too dry to speak. She nodded. When she started trying to climb to her feet, a few hands reached out to help her. She let them. A crowd had gathered, carrying umbrellas or in heavy raincoats. The rain ran off them. The lightning would have been bright and loud. Folks came to look at such things. "Sakes, did you do that?" someone asked, pointing at the old Soames place. The boards had come off the doors and windows, and dust had blown out in great clouds. It still hung in the air, but the heavy rain had already started rinsing it away, flushing the dust into the earth, where the malice couldn't hold up against worms and grass and things. Maisie shrugged. "Guess I did," she said. "I'm a lightning." "Wait, you're that young lightning trapper, Miss something long, wasn't it?" Raylan Crum said. "Maisie Clyde Smethwick," Maisie said. "That's it. Used to work with Gingham, didn't you? I thought you'd left the trade. That's what he said." Maisie shook her head. "You say her lightning did that?" Raylan Crum said, grinning. "Sakes, I'll buy some off of you. I'll buy it today if it'll do that." Maisie nodded. "It will." She considered telling the little crowd dripping under their umbrellas that bottled lightning liked to work, if it had interesting work, and you asked it right. She considered saying it. It was all in the asking. Tinsel flashed overhead just then, and she decided she didn't need to. Instead, Maisie named her price, a fair one, after all she'd been in the trade most of her life, and she sold Raylan Crum some lightning. While she did, her mind jumped to other things. She started to think again about a mechanism to catch the thunder. She still thought it would start with a sponge. End. I wrote that story after staring at a lightning storm for a little while. Well, there you go, guys. That's an experiment, and very well could be that the experiment will be successful enough that I'm going to do it again, but it'll kind of depend. Won't depend on very much. I'm actually planning on definitely doing it some more, probably on a fairly regularly scheduled kind of like a basis, and hopefully I'll be able to be a little bit more just better at it in general. It's still a skill that I'm learning how to do. So thank you very much for all of your time. That's a lot less length than I thought it was going to be. So I appreciate y'all for showing up. I'm probably going to be continuing to do short stories that I have written for a little while out of the book that I wrote, because that's the fun way of doing it for me right now. And yeah, I'll be quite interested to hear if anybody out there's got like beverages that they like to drink with reading, with books that they read. That's one of my favorite things to think about these days. So I'm going to continue thinking about that. And I'll probably do maybe recordings of some of the ones that I do, so that, because some of you, it said that here's the book, somebody asked, Cassandra asked. Ragged Museum. It's a very place. Ragged Museum. I have a whole bunch of copies that I can sign and send to anybody who's interested. Otherwise, you can get it off of Amazon a little bit more efficiently than if you ordered it from me. If you know me or somebody who knows me, then I can send you a link to my online shop, and I can send you a copy of it with a personalized inscription. Otherwise, it is available on Amazon. I'm really proud of it. That story was one of the newest ones that I've written. It's not the newest one that I've written, but I've written it inside of the last year, and I'm really proud of how it turned out. I think that the style was pretty good. I think it turned out all right. So there you go. So I'm one step closer to my long-term goal of basically growing up to be LeVar Burton, which is one of the things I've always wanted to be when I grew up. And you guys are all witness to one of my next most important steps going in that direction, and I really appreciate it. So unless anybody's got any questions, I'm gonna sign off and I'll let you know when I do it next. So thanks.